So good morning and welcome. I'm Marie Warung in the Human Resources Department. Thank you for taking the time to join us for our virtual town hall meeting with President Leebron. We thought we'd be gathering together in Grand Hall and Sammy's on March 12th. Instead, we've been working mostly remotely for 2 months and are coming together courtesy of Zoom. And what an unprecedented 2 months these have been. We finished out the semester with all online classes and held a virtual commencement ceremony last weekend. We've gotten to meet new coworkers in the form of family members and pets. We've spent more time in Zoom meetings than we care to think about. We're learning how to get work done when our teams are dispersed throughout the city. To say these are unsettling times is a gross understatement. And the questions and concerns that you submitted, along with the suggestions for addressing them, reflect the uncertainty and the concern that we're all feeling. We received more than 200 submissions and appreciate everyone who took the time to let us know your thoughts, concerns, and hopes for our Rice community as we start to look towards getting back to the campus that we love. So here we are. President Leebron will share some key updates and then address the issues and the questions that you raised. President Leebron, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Marie. Good morning to you all. I speak to you today in the context of a global catastrophe unlike any we have witnessed. There are over 5 million confirmed cases of COVID-19 around the world, and the actual number of those infected is probably much more. Over 335,000 have died. The United States alone represents nearly 1/3 of those numbers, with over 1.6 million confirmed cases, and as we speak, nearly 100,000 deaths. While the pandemic affects us all, it does not affect all of us equally. These deaths are disproportionately among the poor and minority communities, and the same is true of the economic consequences. Since February, unemployment has surged by 39 million, with the current real unemployment rate estimated at over 22%, just a few points less than the number during the Great Depression. And by one estimate, since March, 40% of those people making under $40,000 per year are now out of work. At this point, I'm pleased to say, none of those were Rice employees who were let go or furloughed because of the pandemic. Across all colleges and universities, the dramatic effects are twofold. First, we lost in March our ability to function as a physical community for the semester, including interacting personally with each other each day and cherishing the many aspects of Rice, including the personal care and attention that we pay to our students and to others in our community. Our teaching, research, and service missions have been severely interrupted, even as we have found ways to continue those missions. Second, the economic outlook for our institutions of higher education is severe as they face endowment losses, reduced philanthropy, reduced state support, and potentially reduced enrollment and tuition. Some have predicted that many of those institutions will close. As you will see today, Rice is fortunate in many respects, but not immune to the effects of COVID-19 and the economic tidal wave that has swept across the world. Although our survival is not threatened, we need to take actions to assure our financial stability. It will take a forceful expression of our collective determination to carry out our mission at the level we aspire to over the next few years, and to assure not merely that we remain a leader in higher education and advanced research, but that we continue to lay the groundwork for an even better future. As Marie said, this town hall was originally scheduled to take place in the Grand Hall of the RMC on March 12th, the day we actually announced that all classes after spring break would be online. We could have accommodated in the RMC the number we usually expect, but not the over 1,500 of you who have tuned in today. We had developed for that March presentation a presentation similar to that we've used in prior years. And I look forward to sharing once more news and updates regarding what our faculty, students, and staff had collectively achieved. 2 months later, we face a radically different environment. But that does not mean that we shouldn't pause and recognize some of those achievements. Thus today, I would like to proceed as follows. First, and somewhat briefer than in the town halls, I would like to review the current state of the university and some of our collective and individual accomplishments this year. Second, I want to acknowledge and review our response to the pandemic as it has emerged this spring. Third, I want to talk about our plans for the fall, recognizing that they are contingent on the circumstances and information as that evolves over the summer. Fourth, I would like to discuss the financial consequences of the pandemic for Rice University and how we are planning to address them. And finally, while I try to address many of the questions I have received in the context of the presentation, I'll address some of the additional questions at the end. As Marie said, we won't get to all the questions by any means, but over the ensuing weeks, we will try to answer those questions in various ways. So I want to begin, of course, with gratitude and thanks to the many people who, in fact, made it possible to continue our mission. And I want to emphasize the university never closed. The campus never closed, and we never stopped carrying out our mission. Those here are really only part of those we owe many thanks to. The crisis management team who developed detailed plans and announcements, the Rice University Police Department, constantly patrolling our community and keeping us safe, housing and dining, who kept our students on campus fed and provided meals to others, facilities engineering and planning, who kept the entire plant functioning, our Office of Information Technology, who made it possible for all of us to teach and do our jobs remotely, the Office of the Dean of Undergraduates, who responded to the many needs and questions of our students, the college magisters and resident associates who remained on our campus to take care of those still living here, the Office of Public Affairs who helped us in our communications. But there are so many others, those responsible for our graduate students, and of course, the entire faculty and those who assist them in delivering our classes. I want to make a special thanks to those who remained on our campus. Our campus was, in fact, never empty. It may have felt empty, but there were always people here protecting us and carrying on our mission. As I said, I want to talk a little bit about the year of 2019, a year that began with many successes, and indeed there are many things still underway that reflect the great position of our university. As usual, I do want to emphasize our mission as a university to engage in path-breaking research, unsurpassed teaching, and now more than ever, contributions to the betterment of our world. And we do that by creating a diverse community of learning and discovery that produces leaders, many of whom we have seen in action during this time. So everything we do is in accordance with our values of responsibility, integrity, community, and excellence. Our enrollment over the years has continued to grow, and our applications are extraordinarily strong. Come back to that. We've become a much more robust community of now over 7,000 students. On our campus each day are approximately 11,000 people helping us pursue our tasks. Our new student enrollment for the fall looks to be strong. There are, of course, more risks than ever. Right now, we have about over 1,050 deposits, probably now more transfers than on this slide, over 1,100 graduate students. I want to emphasize once more the fundamental role that graduate students play in our community. And in each of the past few years, more new graduate students have arrived than undergraduates. And you can see on the screen how they are divided between our MBA programs, our master's programs, and our doctoral programs. You can see equally how important our international enrollments are. We are an extraordinarily diverse community. As you see here, in terms of our undergraduate students in our peer group, by one measure at least, the most diverse. That is the percentage of our student body who come from underrepresented minority groups. We're strong also in our peer group and our graduate students. We're also an incredibly international community. Almost 12% of our undergraduate students are international and 40% of our graduate students. A number of you who wrote in asked about our international community, and your concerns, I'm sad to say, are well placed, but I want to leave no doubt about our commitment to being an international community and doing everything we can continue to do to bring our students, both undergraduate and graduate students, from around the world. And it's not just our students, it's also our faculty and staff. Here you can see that over 1/3 of our tenured and tenure track faculty have come from outside the United States to participate in our endeavor. And we must continue to support that community and recruit our faculty and find the best people from all around the world. And we will do everything we can to continue to do that. We have continued to hire outstanding faculty this year, including one of the most diverse pools of new faculty that you see, with not quite equal numbers of men and women and a majority of people of color in the new cohort of faculty who will be joining our community this coming fall. Our research revenue has continued to grow robustly. We have become a much stronger university, more renowned nationally and around the world as one of the top research universities. We may be comparatively small, but we punch well beyond our weight. You can see here virtual doubling of our research funding from a number of different sources, including federal, foundations, industry, and state support that we receive. And this year, even as we've been challenged, we run well ahead of last year in terms of our research revenue. And we have built a community beyond our campus. You can see through Rice Online, over 3 million enrollments, 1.6 million enrolled in more than one course. Our total enrollments, almost 300,000 in 2019. We have a global footprint today of hundreds of thousands. And that's something we must continue to grow. We have 2 spectacular new degree programs, an online MBA and an online Master of Computer Science. This is what prepared us so well in responding to the pandemic and our ability to move quickly online. And we've launched new programs in neuroengineering, the Carbon Hub, which envisions new ways of using our carbon-based resources that will not damage our environment. Great new program under Tony Pinn in African and African-American studies. New professional master's degrees programs. Program on building research on inequality and diversity to grow equity, run by Jennifer Bratter. A vital endeavor given the inequities and inequalities that have now become so visible in this pandemic. And we have continued new projects on our campus. In the early part of this year, we opened up Craft Hall for Social Sciences. In the slide that you see, everything in red is an academic building, and those in green are student facilities. For those projects still in design or where the planning is underway, we may, as a result of this pandemic, have to defer some of those, at least until we are able to raise the funds on them. But our university has remained vibrant as we have accommodated the extraordinary new researchers who we have recruited from all over the globe. And of course, We continue to be well recognized in various rankings, both for the quality of our academic programs and for the quality and diversity of our community, the quality of our teaching and the quality of our research, the incredible success of the Baker Institute and the Jones School, recognized as having the best graduate entrepreneurial program in the country. Our university remains spectacular and is improving every year. Houston also remains a vital part of our success. Work continues on the Ion in Midtown, and that's expected to open as planned in early 2021. And just this past week, we announced that we would name the grove near the pavilion in which the Plensa artwork is housed, the Reverend William Lawson Grove, in honor of somebody who has contributed remarkably to equality and progress and opportunity in the city of Houston. And our faculty has continued to achieve extraordinary recognition. This semester, Callum McDaniel won a Pulitzer Prize for his book, The Sweet Taste of Liberty. Lacey Johnson in the English Department, a Guggenheim Fellowship, and Lydia Kavaki in Computer Sciences was recognized for her extraordinary achievements in that field. Two new members of the Academy, Reggie DeRoche, our outgoing Dean of Engineering, who I will return to, and Jean France. Our students are equally spectacular. During this challenging time, we have benefited from extraordinary student leadership. The outgoing president of the GSA, Hannah Pierce, and the outgoing SA president, Grace Wilkerson, are among the best leaders we have encountered. And Allison Farris at the GSA and Anna Clyburn in the SA are off to strong starts and providing us great advice as we address the problems in front of us. Our students have won awards. Savannah Kofer, the Knight Hennessy Scholar at Stanford, I sat in her class on digital origami this semester. And Courtney McJunkins, who I've gotten to know, won a prestigious Truman Scholarship winner. Our student athletes, Erica Wumike, who interned in my office and has also won a NCAA postgraduate fellowship and is headed either to Minnesota to play professional basketball or to medical school, and Adolfo Carvalho on our men's track and team, our two most outstanding student athletes this year. And this has been a year of leadership transitions. I want to welcome two new leaders. Of course, Reggie DeRoche is our new provost, who will in fact assume his duties fully this coming Memorial Day weekend. And Kathy Dantley Warren, our new vice president for development and alumni relations. I want to take a moment and thank Seiichi Matsuda for his truly extraordinary service as interim provost. We simply would not have achieved all we have done this year or been able to handle the challenges of the pandemic the way we have without the role that he has played. COVID-19 interrupted two school dean searches where we had planned to complete those searches in March or in April. The interim deans who have served us so well during this year have agreed to continue: Susan McIntosh in social sciences and John Kasparian in architecture, and I'm deeply indebted to them. And we have two more deanships to fill, and the searches have been launched. And I'm very grateful to Janet Bram, who has agreed to serve as the interim dean in natural sciences, and Rob Griffin, who has agreed to serve as the interim dean in engineering while those searches are undertaken. So that's a snapshot of where we are this year, a little bit briefer than private years, but certainly I hope you can see that as we were leading up to the beginning of March and nervously watching events across the world and the spread of the pandemic, our university was in spectacularly good shape with another great year unfolding. And then this pandemic spread across the United States. Our decisions from the beginning regarding COVID-19 and our response to it are guided by four critical principles. First, to protect the health, safety, and well-being of every member of our community. and contribute to local, national efforts to reduce the spread of this deadly virus. Second, to base our decisions on health guidance from an authoritative and scientific source, namely the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And third, to carry out our academic missions of teaching and research as best as we can under these circumstances. And fourth, to assure that all of our actions are consistent with our Rice values of responsibility, integrity, community, and excellence. We had to make a very fast transition. Our faculty moved over 1,900 courses online in less than 2 weeks. Rice continued to provide housing and meals for international students and others who needed to remain on campus to complete the semester. And we never left them in doubt that we would do so. Rice IT supported students and faculty who needed help with equipment and technology, not just in Houston and on our campus, but literally around the world. Our faculty senate adopted very quickly flexible approaches to grading and course withdrawal to ease the understandable stress that our students were under. And the result, we now know, is the successful completion of the semester by almost all of our students. Of course, merely delivering on our teaching, I shouldn't say merely, but delivering on our teaching was not enough for our faculty and students and staff. All stepped forward to contribute to both the local effort and the global effort. The story that received the most attention was the development through Rice 360 and the OEDK, a ventilator costing less than $300 at a time where it appeared that it was a ventilator shortage that might lead to so many deaths. The Moody Center turned its art facilities into printing 3D face shields. We set up a fund with $500,000 and are seeking matching grants for COVID-19 related research. 18 grants have been awarded so far to researchers across the university. And these are some of the areas in virtually every part of the university. We need to contribute to the science and engineering that will address the threats posed by COVID-19. But we also need to deeply understand its effect on all parts of our community and how our society reacts. And so those grants have been made virtually to all schools across the university. And of course, we opened 2 of our residential colleges to TMC workers who, after a long shift or 2 shifts, needed a place to recover and recuperate and be safe and not infect their families. We're grateful to the workers of the TMC for all they have done for our community in the city of Houston. And we had a virtual commencement. And here you see one of our new graduates, Gabrielle Falcon, with her family, who expressed herself so well in the pages of the Houston Chronicle, and the joy that she and her family felt on her graduation, even though they could not be on our campus. So our response to the pandemic over this spring was strong. We enabled our students to complete their semester. We enabled many of those on our campus to complete their work. And our university continued to function despite the important interruptions to our mission. And it's now time for us to look ahead to, admittedly, an uncertain future. Here is the timeline, in some ways most relevant to our immediate community. On January 21st was the first confirmed coronavirus case in the US. 9 days later, the first case of person-to-person transmission. I'm not going to go over every aspect of it, but you can see how quickly our world was transformed by the rapid spread of this disease across our country, and no part has been less unaffected. It was just 2 months ago that US deaths passed 1,000, and sadly this weekend they may pass 100,000. As announced earlier, the jobless toll now is nearly at 40 million. We have been fortunate in Houston. The curve has been flattened, and although there's still causes for concern, the infection and death rates have been lower than in many other major cities. But while increased testing is undoubtedly in place, it is not yet at the levels that have been recommended by experts. Economic issues threaten our welfare, and the impact on Houston with the collapse of energy prices has been especially severe. Texas has now allowed some businesses to reopen, but it remains vitally important, critically important, that we follow health protocols of distancing and wearing masks, for example, while reopening that economy. And we have to recognize that it's not merely those who are affected by the disease or have somebody in their family affected by the disease, but the stress across our communities and its effects on our mental health. And those with children are often especially challenged as schools and daycare centers remain closed. So where are we now and where must we go? Our campus operations were shrunk during the pandemic to only about 10% of our staff, several hundred being on campus. And the same thing true of the students who reside on campus, having about 250 students until recently. About 150 of those will remain on campus over the summer. We have done our best to communicate with students, staff, and faculty about the pandemic and the measures that we must take. Summer school was moved entirely online with hugely expanded offerings and much, much higher enrollments. Our planning is now underway to return to the campus in the fall if conditions permit, under a framework of what we've called flexibility, agility, and adaptability. We have to be flexible in the delivery mechanisms that we have available for our teaching. We need to be prepared to respond very quickly to any changes, as we did this past spring. And we must be adaptable and able to accommodate the different needs of individuals and parts of our populations. And we have to recognize that we face an evolving and uncertain environment, and our plans may change, and sometimes they will change quickly. We are now in phase 1 of ramping up activity on our campus, with the goal of opening our campus to our students again in the fall. And I want to emphasize, and I'll do this several times, that will depend on the evolving facts over the summer. For now, we will continue to follow CDC guidance on personal protection behaviors and hygiene. We ask everyone to wear face coverings or masks when in public or group settings, to engage in physical distancing of at least 6 feet, continue health monitoring and self-reporting, and isolation and quarantine if necessary. And if you are ill or feel ill, please do not come to work. Stay home. Essential employees will begin during this phase 1 until the beginning of August to return. Others, as determined by deans and vice presidents. Non-essential employees, those not needed on the campus, will mostly continue to work at home during this period. And we are engaged in a process of returning those to our labs and to provide services by Fondren Library under stringent conditions that will protect the health and safety of all involved. We'll support research and all required to submit mitigation plans as they begin to return to work. As mentioned before, our summer courses are online, and we're engaged in the process of preparation and instruction for dual delivery, that is, both remotely and in classrooms this coming fall. and next month, the Rice Children's Campus is expected to reopen. For the time being, although our campus is open, we will have critical services only: contractors, construction workers, and deliveries. No campus events, camps, activities, or large gatherings are allowed this summer. There is a lot of work and many details to be worked out. We have appointed an Academic Restart Committee, or ARC, to undertake that work under the leadership of Chris Johnscroll, Speaker of the Faculty Senate, and with representatives from every school across the campus to work through all those details and the individual variations. Many of you had questions exactly about this: what we would do when, and what the classrooms would look like, and what training would be available, and all of those details. And I'll answer some of those questions later, but those will be worked out over the next weeks and into the summer. These are the range of issues that this committee will address, and no doubt some more. How many people should we have in a classroom? How should we engage or accomplish our physical distancing? Do we need to change our schedules, spread the hours over the day in a different way? As we've already announced, given concerns about a resurgence of the pandemic, we will end all classes before Thanksgiving. We haven't yet determined whether that will be the Friday before Thanksgiving or the Tuesday, and the ARC committee will advise us on that. To what extent will students and faculty be able to make their own choices about whether to participate in person or on campus? And how do we provide the best training for both students and faculty? These are just some of the questions that need to be addressed over the coming weeks and next couple of months in order to be prepared to return to the campus in the fall. We'll then begin a second phase. Again, we will follow CDC guidance at the time on personal protection, behaviors, and hygiene. We would expect that still mean to require masks and physical distancing and monitoring our health. And once more, if you're feeling ill, stay at home. And we will begin the testing for COVID-19. That is a vital and important part of our plan of testing, contact tracing, and quarantining. In August, again, employees will return to campus as determined by deans and vice presidents. Some will continue to work remotely. Support services will be fully operational, both by on-campus employees, if that is possible, and remote employees. Visitors and events will still be limited to critical services. Campus events, activities, and gatherings will be limited to no more than 50 people with physical distancing requirements. In the fall, in mid-August for orientation week, which will no doubt be a very different orientation week this year. I think it's August 23rd when classes begin. We'll have regular testing of our population, case management and contact tracing, continued health monitoring, quarantining as necessary, physical distancing, face coverings in public and group settings. Still, those who are ill must remain at home, sanitizing protocols, and the decisions and protocols of the Academic Restart Committee being implemented. Again, employee arrangements will be determined by deans and vice presidents, with all services operational. Student life will be modified with more limited social gatherings, likely special arrangements for dining, club activities, physical activities, and others. Social gathering spaces may be closed or with limited or modified usage. We will reopen the campus to visitors with appropriate physical distancing. Hopefully restore tours to the campus, again with distancing measures. Hopefully we'll have sporting events resume, again with special measures in place. We expect, even in the fall, to limit gatherings to 50 people or less, although we'll continue to respond to the guidance from the Centers for Disease Control. So that outlines our plans for the fall and ramping things up. And I want to say once more, that's our plan. That is our hope. That is what we think is justified on the basis of the information we now have available. But we will monitor that information over the summer, and we hope make a final decision on that in July. I'd now like to turn our attention to the financial challenges that I mentioned earlier. This is, of course, a picture of our first president, Edgar Odell Lovett, who had many challenges during his time, including the Spanish pandemic in 1918 and just over 100 years ago and World War I. But 90 years ago, he faced the challenges of the Great Depression. And this is what John Bowles wrote about him, that his defining feature during these times was the steadfast optimism. The financial impact of COVID-19 across our economy and higher education is severe. The direct cost of the pandemic so far to Rice is, roughly speaking, $10 million in expenses and lost revenues. For example, refunds we made for housing and dining. The downturn and volatility of the financial markets have impacted our endowments and philanthropy. There's little doubt that the high unemployment rates will affect the needs for financial aid of our students. And there's much uncertainty and travel restrictions that may affect students' decisions about going to college. Many students may decide to defer. And the result of all this is that every source of revenue faces some risk for our university. And while we will need to make changes to respond to those changes in revenue, we also ought to recognize that in many ways, Rice is in a stronger position. Our comparatively large endowment, which I'll come back to, does help provide some resilience and gives us the time for thoughtful transitions. We have the liquidity, that is the cash, to continue to pay all of our bills. Our recent debt issuance affirmed our AAA rating and provided resources to continue the capital projects that we think we must continue. Our comparatively lower tuition rate among our peers makes us more affordable to our students. Our already very generous financial aid makes us better prepared to support our students as their families may face greater financial need. We have the capacity, if it'll help, to expand our undergraduate enrollment with new housing already opening on campus in January of next year. We don't own a hospital and therefore have no hospital losses draining our current resources. And although we have a wonderful athletics program, it has never brought in large amounts of revenue, and so we don't have large amounts of revenue to lose as many schools do. We already have a strong foothold in online education that could be expanded, as we have already seen in the summer offerings. We have efficiencies that can be realized through the implementation of our new enterprise resource planning and other administrative improvements. And I really have to express our collective thanks to the Rice Management Company, the folks who manage our endowment, and they have done a spectacular job in limiting the losses of our endowment, which are much less than those in the stock market and elsewhere. Here is what our budget looks like, close to $800 million. As you see, 40% of our revenues come from our endowment. About 20% is net tuition, substantially higher than in earlier years, given the growth of our undergraduate student body and our master's programs. And another 20% roughly from sponsored research. $60 million from restricted gifts and designated funds, and the rest in auxiliaries like parking, for example. But it's really our tuition and our endowment distribution which provide the bulk of our revenues to support our everyday operations. And most of our compensation most of our expenses are in compensation, about 60% of that. A lot also in supplies and expenses and equipment. And it's a big question how much we can save out of those expenses. At the end of the day, these two numbers need to balance. We cannot spend more in our expenses than we are able to bring in our revenues. A number of you asked questions about the Rice Endowment. The purpose of the endowment is to support our operations now and for future generations. It's not a rainy day fund we can dip into to make up the shortfall in our revenues that we're now anticipating. Rice must preserve the purchasing power for the future by spending, on average, less than the earnings to account for inflation. But the endowment can help smooth downturns, and we're very fortunate. That is what happened for those of you who were here in 2008 and 2009 when we saw severe losses on our endowment, and we were able to adjust to that downturn over several years. And so it can smooth the past, but it cannot eliminate the need to significantly adjust spending. The Board of Trustees of Rice University approves our annual spending each year, and over time it must fall within a 4.5 to 5% of the endowment value over the last 3 years. In no case can it ever exceed 6.5% of that value. If our spending is too high, the ability of the endowment to contribute to the permanent mission and success of Rice and fill the purposes of our donors to support the university in perpetuity would decline. And so our endowment is a big help, but is not the answer to all of the challenges we face on the financial front. Here you'll see a sort of graphic representation of this. Going back to 2009, on occasion following, we exceeded for a little bit the 5.5% guideline, and then brought ourselves back underneath that guideline to prepare ourselves for a sustained future. Right now, we think the endowment may be down as much as 10%. And as I'll explain shortly, other revenues are also at risk. If we do essentially nothing, we will exceed that guideline. And this, financially for Rice, this is in fact the curve that we must flatten as we move forward. As I said, the endowment is only one source of our revenues, for us, the largest source of our revenues. But there are also concerns about our net tuition. How many students will actually enroll this fall? Will some defer, particularly defer if they cannot be on campus? How will high unemployment affect the financial aid that our students will need? What will happen to our housing and dining revenues, particularly again if we can't reopen the campus? Fundraising may suffer given that those who have been so generous to us are suffering from their own financial declines. The athletic revenues that have helped support our athletics endeavors may also decline, although again, not nearly as much as many of our peer schools. The bottom line is that lower revenues require spending cuts and new sources of revenue to maintain a balanced budget. The efforts underway provide for a comparatively soft landing if you look at some of our peers. But given the uncertainties, we can't make guarantees. The more we work together to identify savings and raise new revenues, the more we can protect all members of our community. The financial gap could be as large as $60 million or more over the next 5 years. Again, that could grow depending on endowment returns this year and over the next several years, depending on our net tuition, which depends on enrollment and financial aid, and depending on philanthropy and athletics and event revenues. We must close that gap by reducing expenses and raising revenues. And as I've said, if we're unable to open in the fall, the challenges will be greater. We are working this summer to confirm the size of the gap and exactly what we will need to do and the actions that we'll need to take. And we will be communicating and consulting on those actions. We'll implement the processes as we move forward. We've told the Board of Trustees that we'll analyze a wide range of options over the summer, and there'll be a special meeting of the board during the summer in early July. We have surveyed our faculty, staff, and students regarding issues relating to COVID-19, and will continue to do so over the weeks and months ahead. As noted, the Academic Restart Committee, or ARC, involves a collaboration from across the campus to advise us on every detail related to the reopening. We hope you will share with your supervisors their thoughts and concerns. I've seen a number of questions come in even during this session. And we'll be implementing other ways to communicate your ideas, suggestions, and concerns, including ways to do so anonymously. And we hope to make those announcements shortly. We've overcome challenges throughout our history. I noted before that just over 100 years ago in 1918, we faced the combination of the Spanish flu and World War I. The students, faculty, and staff were abruptly dispersed, just in some ways as they were this spring. Military doctors, nurses, and staff came to Rice and converted a residential college into a hospital that served the Rice community in the city of Houston. Commencement was held early so that all members of groups could serve in the war. Some fell gravely ill. We survived the Spanish flu and the war and emerged a stronger university. And when folks returned and the February 1919 issue of the Thresher was issued, it was noted that we are living at a wholly different, bigger, broader, and better school. And that's what I see in the years ahead. But in those years, we will need to do more with less, and we expect to be successful at that. The university is a community of creative, resourceful, and committed people, and ours is more creative than most. We will need to be a more efficient and effective university. Each of us will need to use our time and our resources better, including by serving more students. This is a time to think creatively and critically about how we have approached our work and resolve which aspects are centrally important to our culture, our values, and our community, and others which are costly habits that we now need to think about changing. I know we have the talent and the will to provide a great experience to our students and to emerge from this pandemic and the financial crisis as a stronger and more vibrant community. We face times that are difficult and uncertain, both for our university and the members of our community. In these times, we must pull together and continue to execute the mission of the university with excellence, to pursue the research that changes our world, and to provide the education that opens opportunities for our students. These will be challenging times. We cannot promise there will be no staff reductions or furloughs. We cannot promise no programs will be eliminated or resources cut. What we can do, each and every one of us, is look for the solutions to our challenges, to find the savings and efficiencies that will enable us to protect more of our employees, to seek new sources of revenue that can offset those which are at risk. We can, each and every one of us, contribute to the excellence and community that makes us a destination for students, staff, and faculty alike. What we cannot do is simply hunker down, simply try to ride out the storm, or decide that there are no new aspirations to pursue or opportunities that we will seize. What we can and must promise is that we will act in accordance with our values, that we will act with compassion and concern, that we will communicate and consult with honesty and candor, that we will make the best of the circumstances we are in and overcome the obstacles we face by finding the opportunities they conceal. Difficult challenges are ahead, but we must remember we are owls. We soar when the skies are darkest. Thank you, and I'm now going to turn to your questions.
Thank you, President Leebron. So we've got a question. If we resume in-person classes in the fall, how is the university going to respond to professors who do not feel comfortable teaching in person? Will instructors who are high risk, either due to age or pre-existing conditions, or those who care for someone who is high risk, have the option to hold classes remotely?
Yes, those who are at risk or who are caring for someone at risk will be able to teach remotely. Their students may be sitting in a classroom and able to engage with each other. But for anyone who is at risk or who needs to care for someone at risk, they will be able to teach remotely.
So when will Rice make and communicate a decision about the fall semester?
We don't know exactly, and we want to monitor the information closely over the summer. I would guess this will be in July and most likely mid-July. That would give us about a month before the beginning of O week. And of course, we would want to make sure we can notify the students and the family about what our plans will be. I will say that said, even if we make a decision in mid-July, for example, that we can go forward on the campus, we'll still have to constantly re-examine that decision to make sure it's safe for people to be back on the campus.
So I think in this time of uncertainty, we're all worried about our jobs. I'd like to know what we can do beyond our regular jobs to help the university and the students and each other during this time.
That's a great question. I think really central to where we are. I think the best answer is to do all we can to assure to the maximum extent possible that we pursue our missions with excellence and act on the care and engagement that characterize our community. We need to remain the strongest community we can and to provide the best experience, whether that's going to be on campus or online, to our students. And if we do that, then we'll continue to be successful and carry out our missions to the fullest extent.
Thank you. Is there any risk for full-time employees to be furloughed?
Yes, unfortunately there is, and the risk will be greater if we aren't able to return to our campus. We'll do all we can to minimize the job losses in those circumstances. And we can minimize that in part by finding new sources of revenue. And that means looking at finding new markets, potentially expanding our student body, and strengthening our online programs.
Thank you. What is the pedagogical vision for the dual mode of delivery? Would it simply be a static video feed of an in-person class? Or would it be imagined as a blended online and in-person class, which would then have more online assignment and interactive components?
It's blended in the sense that we would expect to have both online students and those in the class, but the technology will allow the professor to sit and engage with all the students in the class. It might be that there are a small number of students who would be sort of watching a video after a class. Those might be students, for example, international students who are unable to get to the campus in the fall, but still wanted to start their education. Given the time zone, they may have to engage that way. But the basic idea is that all of the students would be able to be engaged by the professor, would be seen by the professor. And so it's really carrying on both of those in this blended or hybrid manner.
Thank you. How do we ensure equitable educational experiences for students? When Rice is in regular mode, we do a really good job of this. But this past semester in the remote format, we've noticed some big disparities in students' experiences.
I think this is actually a really important point. In the spring, we tried to support the technology needs of our students, and we'll do so again. We permitted students who had to remain on campus in order to really be able to take advantage of the online education to do so. But one of the reasons to really try to reopen the campus, if it's possible, and that it's important, is that we know that many of our students really need the social support that's available when we are together. I think many of our most vulnerable students really need that environment to be as successful as possible. But whether we're online or remote, I want to emphasize again that all of our services will be provided to enable all of our students to succeed just as they did over the spring semester.
Another question, where do we see higher education going in 10 to 20 years? What insights can we anticipate? For example, who or what will be our biggest competitors? And how do we tap into that learning and prepare for possible futures so that we remain ahead of the curve?
Well, this is a great question, which maybe should be the subject of a town hall on its own. We shouldn't think there's one kind of higher education. There's something close to 5,000 institutions of higher education in the United States, and each of them is different. And just as there are many kinds of those institutions now, there continue to be in the future, from great community colleges to small liberal arts colleges to research universities. We must remain true to our values and to our distinctive attributes. But I think we have some great opportunities ahead. I think we're going to see the barriers that now exist between online and on-campus education diminished, and we'll see a much more flexible approach to college education. We'll see students become more mobile. They will want, I think, to make more choices and be able to access their education from more different kinds of locations. I think the institutions that can implement a more responsive and personalized approach have a real opportunity. And I think this is something that Rice can excel at more than most universities, to create a really personalized approach to the education where our students can, in effect, choose where they want to be and what courses they might want online, what courses they want to participate in person, while still offering the kind of very special community experience that our students have made very, very clear is a really important part of their experience at Rice.
So another question, does the university plan to provide masks and disinfectant or sanitizer to students to facilitate their safety? And what about to staff and to faculty? Making it easier to stay safe will make us all safer.
That's absolutely the case, and testing is also part of that. But as to the specific question, yes, we will be providing masks, although I urge everybody to be creative about their masks, and we hope the residential colleges will have their own particular mask. It's an opportunity for personal expression as well as safety, but this safety is paramount. So we will be providing masks and we will be providing sanitizer across the campus.
Thank you. Does the university plan to continue limiting gatherings to small numbers, such as 15 or less, and mandating social distancing protocols in such congregations? This should apply to classes, faculty meetings, college events, and so on.
Yes, as I say, at this point, we expect a general limitation to 50 on campus. That's our starting assumption. And again, we'll look at the guidance we see from the CDC and others. But it's a limitation to 50 with appropriate physical distancing and maybe special rules and further limitations in some contexts, like the residential colleges. I know the Dean of Undergraduates is looking at all of those questions to make sure that the rules we have are appropriate to the circumstances, the population, and the spaces. But again, overall, the rule that we expect to be in effect is to limit such gatherings to 50 people.
There have been a number of questions around testing. Will those on campus be regularly tested for the virus? Will contact tracing be in place? Will staff and faculty be tested before students come in? Will visitors be required to be tested before they're on campus?
Well, I think the answer to the last question is I don't think there's a way for us to test all visitors or without completely closing the campus, which we don't plan to do, but we do plan to require physical distancing. But yes, the plan is to test all of those on campus and to have a regular testing protocol and to establish protocols for contact tracing. That's one of a number of reasons to limit, for example, event sizes to make sure we can do effective contact tracing.
So how does Rice plan to balance continued pursuit of research excellence with the expected budget cuts that will come over the next several years? Do we plan to identify strategic areas to maintain growth while other areas shrink or suspend growth? And if so, how will those priorities be established?
So yes, we will continue to pursue excellence, and that's going to require more, perhaps in the way of strategic choices than we have been used to in recent years. Process will be set up under the provost's office to make those decisions in consultation, and particularly with the deans, but also others as we decide where we need to invest in the coming years, what areas we need to maintain, and there may be some areas where we decide that those will have to do with somewhat less resources in the coming years. But we'll have a process in place under the guidance of the provost to make those decisions.
Thank you. Another question, how can we better communicate to people who do not live on campus what our expectations are with respect to social distancing and the appropriate use of campus spaces, particularly if we have a second wave of infections and stay-at-home orders in the future?
This is another great question, and I have to agree that it's been a bit of a problem. I'm on the campus almost every day. I try to maintain a pretty substantial distance to others, and even those I know very, very well, some of the magisters that we encounter on the campus. I do think we will have to have more comprehensive signage on the campus about what is required by those coming on our campus. And I think our police will have to regularly advise people who come on our campus when they're not in compliance with our rules. I think right now the rules are not perhaps sufficiently posted. Of course, there are not many people on the campus. The campus is a very safe place to walk around, easy to maintain your distance. But I think as we enter the fall, we're going to have to be more careful about that and give people more notice about what the requirements are.
What is our contingency plan in case there's a resurgence of the virus in the late fall or early winter?
So if it's the very late fall or early winter, that hopefully it would be after Thanksgiving. So I want to emphasize that right now the plan is not to close the campus after classes end in the fall. The campus would remain open and students would be permitted to remain in the housing, for example, unless there is reason to change that decision. If we see evidence of a resurgence, for example, then we might once more close the campus. Hopefully we'll be able to complete classes on campus, but we can't be sure of that. If not, part of the reason for the dual delivery is to make sure we're prepared to change much more quickly than before. Not the 2 weeks that we had between the week of classes we canceled and spring break, but really within a day or two that we could move from being in person to online, because we will have been delivering all those classes online. That might not be 100% of the classes because some classes pose particular difficulties for online delivery, but we hope nearly all classes that where it's possible will be a dual delivery. And so if it turns out there's a resurgence, for example, in December, and we decide that students can't come back to the campus, then we'll switch to online delivery for the spring semester. But we have to keep in mind how quickly this emerged in the spring this year. I think we'll know much better this year, both because of much better testing nationally for COVID-19 and our own testing regimes on campus. We'll be able to make better decisions earlier than we were able to make in the spring. But we need to be prepared at any moment to change our delivery mechanism and complete the education of our students.
So working from home where possible has been vitally important, and many consider it very productive. In order to keep the numbers of people on campus down, will this still be considered in the months to come?
Yes, we have a committee that's going to take a very careful look at staff issues. We've learned a lot about working from home. We've learned a lot about what the advantages are and learned about what some of the disadvantages are. But I think it's true that we'll think about that a little more flexibly as we go into the future. And of course, it's not necessarily an all or nothing decision. There may be some employees where it's decided that in order to, in part, as the question suggests, to keep density down on the campus, it may make sense to have employees come to work 2 days and stay home 3 days, or come to work 3 days and stay 2 days. It helps keep the office density down and enables people to be maximally productive. So we're going to see what we've learned from the spring semester about working at home and see what makes sense, whether we're sort of back fully in operation or we're remote again.
So, question about incoming students. Will all newly admitted students to the class of 2024 be allowed to defer for a year and matriculate in the fall of 21? Assuming that a larger than normal number of students do choose to defer, what would that mean for the next year's class?
So we have not yet sort of made the decision about exactly what the deferral rules are going to be and how we're going to implement them. There have been some articles that have suggested that maybe even 20% of the incoming class, not Rice's class, but across the country might defer. If those deferrals come very late, that's going to have a severe revenue impact on the university and it exacerbate the situation in which we find ourselves. But I think that's something for which we have to be prepared.
Thank you. So there were, I don't know if there's anything else that you can say about testing. There were questions about facilities for testing, any other information about where we are in the planning for that?
I'm sorry, that was the planning for the testing?
COVID testing.
Yeah, so we're in conversation, particularly with those in the medical center, about making sure we have enough tests and developing the protocols for that. And we would expect that to be worked out, I think, probably over the next month or so.
Thank you. So for those of you who submitted questions in the Q&A, we've received a number of them. We will be sending those out to the folks who are best suited to respond to them. And we will be compiling those responses and getting those posted once we've got that information complete. As a reminder, we've recorded this webinar, this town hall, so you can view it once the link is available. And those who may have missed it also will be able to view it. I'd like to thank President Leebron for taking the time to present such a thorough and informative town hall. And I'll turn it back over to you for the last word, President Leebron.
Well, I just want to conclude, I think, by expressing my gratitude to all the members of this extraordinary community. We've done extremely well in adapting during this spring semester. And those thanks go to our students, our faculty, our staff, our parents out there, our alumni, all the folks who came together to make that possible. As I've said several times, I wish I could say this is over or we know exactly how it's going to unfold. We don't. And the only way we can really succeed is by all of us working together and figuring out what are the contributions that each of us can make. We have more flexibility than most universities. We need to make adjustments, but I know we have the willpower and capacity to make those adjustments. We will continue to act in accordance with our values and will continue to act in ways to the extent possible that protect the members of our community, both from a health and safety and employment point of view. And so I just want to thank all of you again, and we look forward to communicating with you more in the future. We'll keep you updated. Please send us your ideas and suggestions for the future. In the meantime, please stay safe. We wish the best to you and your families, and we do look forward again to seeing you on our campus. Thank you all so very, very much.